and currently I work with Prabha in laws on social reproduction. So here I'm really delighted to welcome Ms. Upasana Garnaik, who is a doctoral candidate in sociology at the University of Texas at Austin. Uh, Ms. Garnaik, after obtaining her Master of Laws from Duke Law School in 2012, she worked as a lawyer, researcher, and academic in India. Her research and teaching interests include gender, family, economic sociology, and the law, which is very interesting. Her dissertation focuses on middle class women's experience in family disputes in India, where she uses qualitative techniques to uncover familial and legal mechanisms that make it extremely difficult for women to access family wealth. In today's conversation, Upasana will be taking us through her study, Gendered Money and Relational Work, Women's Money and Labor in Matrimonial Disputes in India, where she examines the legal and familial mechanisms through which money becomes gendered and how gendering of money in family disputes renders women's money invisible. The study gains importance in that it sheds new light and broadens our understanding of social meaning of money, the temporality of relational work, and highlights the gendered nature of relational work and money itself. Without much delay, I invite Upasana to walk us through the exciting work. Over to you, Upasana.
Thank you so much, Janet. I'm just going to start sharing the slides. Okay, all right. So, hi everyone, I'm Upasana Garnaik, and like Janet said, I'm finishing up my PhD in sociology at UT Austin. I thank this working group for inviting me to present my work, and I look forward to all the comments and questions. To give you a sense of my background and where this paper fits into my broader research agenda, I'm a lawyer by training, and I practiced in India before starting my PhD. I was associated with a family law firm in Delhi and also taught family law and other subjects in the Jindal Global Law School. My dissertation looks at women's experiences in family disputes when they seek economic claims. The paper that I'm presenting today here draws from that larger data of my dissertation project. So, just to start off the conversation, I'm sure that most of you.
वो हाथ सैनिटाइजर टाइप कुछ हो
Okay, just to start off this conversation, I'm sure that most of you will be familiar with the Indian context and the laws, but to just bring everyone on the same page, I'll just go over some of the important aspects of the Indian law to contextualize my paper. So for the purposes of the paper, I primarily deal with cases under the Hindu Marriage Act. And like we know that HMA doesn't provide a provision on what should be considered a matrimonial asset and how asset distribution should take place in the event of a divorce or separation. So essentially, there are like three ways that we go about dealing with economic rights and obligations. We know that a spouse can ask for maintenance and alimony in contested cases, and judges decide the appropriate amount based on some guidelines that have been framed. B, like there's mutual consent cases where parties come to an agreement. And C, like third, the most popular sort of mode of dispute resolution today in family dispute is negotiations through mediations. Some of the mutual consent agreement also like happen through negotiations, through mediations, or they could happen through like external sort of mechanisms of dispute resolutions. Now, because of its popularity, the mediation's popularity in family law, I pay a lot of attention to settlement agreements and negotiations in mediations through courts. So in addition to divorce laws, there's another sort of aspect of the family sort of disputes that I'm very keen on, because a lot of cases that I was studying also stem from like domestic violence cases. So in cases of domestic violence, a complainant's right to reside is protected, and a financial compensation also can be sort of asked for. So in this sort of legal context, I examine the role and meaning of women's money when it comes to decisions regarding economic claims in matrimonial disputes. So I don't want to bore everyone with theory, but I just would like to contextualize the paper and sort of talk about a little bit about the concepts that and terms that I use for my analysis. Um, First, I rely on the work of feminist legal theorists who have pointed out the gendered sort of biases in the legal system. And scholars have observed that women seeking legal redress, particularly in family matters, are often viewed with suspicion, considered manipulative, and labeled as greedy. Second, I rely on the concept of relational work from economic sociology. Just to quickly explain this concept, sociologists argue that money decisions are based on how people think about their relationships. People, therefore, do relational work to assess whether an economic transaction is appropriate for the relationship at hand. So, for example, giving gold at the time of marriage to daughters is very appropriate. It's considered an appropriate economic transaction for that appropriate relationship of father and daughter or mother and daughter. But to give um, property perhaps might not be considered as an economic appropriate transaction. So in my research, I not only look at interpersonal relationships, but and interpersonal relational work, but I also look at institutional relational work, which is done by judges, lawyers, and mediators. And I show how this relational work can be temporal, can be gendered, and can be very different depending on the context. Finally, I use the concept of invisible labor and the social meaning of money. So I combine insights from sociology of gender and economic sociology to conceptualize invisible money, to show how money is often an overlooked aspect of invisible labor. So to just sort of give you an idea about how I went about collecting my data, I conducted 12 months of ethnographic fieldwork uh, from August 2021 to August 2022. And prior to that, I had done some other sort of work. I had conducted some interviews uh, during COVID over the phone. Uh, but during this field work, I observed negotiations in mediation centers. I attended like courtroom hearings. I attended meetings in legal offices, basically following the life of the dispute and whoever allowed me to sort of follow their cases. So before starting my PhD, I was a practicing family lawyer and an academic, and I relied on my previous sort of professional identity and network to get access to courtrooms and mediation centers. I conducted 55 interviews with women litigants, lawyers, and mediators. My interviews with women litigants were often the longest. They lasted between like 30 minutes to 4 hours, 5 hours sometimes. And the other interviews sort of lasted for like 30 minutes to an hour. And finally, I conducted sort of archival research. I had done some archival research before I went into the field, but I also sort of followed with like case documents, orders, judgments, and I would be happy to talk more about detail about my analysis method if anybody has questions later. Um, Before I talk about my findings, I just wanted to emphasize, and I know everybody probably in the room knows this, but emphasize on the prevalence of patriarchality in India, which means that the married couples reside mostly with the husband's family. And I feel like this context makes rights to the matrimonial home highly crucial. To understand the stories of these women that I'm going to talk about in this presentation, the matrimonial home is considered the final home for married women. So there's sort of certainly divorces are still frowned upon. Matrimonial home is the important element. So women actually invest a lot in like making that work. Um, so I focus on a couple of stories from my field to show how gendered expectations of care from good mothers, wives, and daughter-in-laws go beyond the physical and emotional and into the financial realm. And then I show how this financial care work, money that women spend on the well being of the household, is invisibilized along with other aspects of caregiving by not only by the family but also by legal institutions. And third, I show how women's money can take on different meaning and is made visible or invisible in varied like temporal contexts. So this is a quote by Sanjana. She says, "I seem to be the most invisible person in the house. I never felt like it was my house." She continues, "There was a constant conversation in the house about, oh, father did this." She's talking about her stepchildren saying this, father did this, father did that. And I was like, really? I left it at that. I would never correct it. But then off late, it has become very ugly. The entitlement, the privilege, the expectations, even the asking and the non acknowledgement. I do feel very severely used. There was no proper earning there, so I would be supporting all the household expenses. It became slightly abusive. Now, Sanjana is 60 years old. She got married at a very young age. Her partner had been previously married and had two children from that marriage. Sanjana and her partner amicably decided to separate a couple of years ago. But that didn't minimize Sanjana's role as the only financially solvent member of the family. There was an unsaid expectation that Sanjana will continue providing for the family. We already know how women's labor in the household is rendered invisible by various mechanisms. Sanjana's case shows that how invisible labor is intertwined with invisible money. Not only is the labor that she puts in the household taken for granted, but the money attached to sustaining the household and in turn being a good mother is invisibilized too. In her case, being a good mother is not only attached to putting in the labor of care work for her children and being financially capable to handle the associated costs of child rearing, but it is also that both money and the labor remain unspoken about. When she tried to mention how much money she had spent on the household, it was met with a lot of frowns, and she was always told to give whatever things that she had bought back. Similarly to Sanjana, a lot of women's expenditures on the household are overlooked. What is also interesting is that Sanjana, like many other women, feel conflicted about being acknowledged and having any claims to the marital property. The history of her own natal dispossession, in addition to her sister in law's disinheritance, illuminated a pattern of gender dispossession, meaning that women are seldom considered primary heirs to the property. The intersection of wife's and daughter's statuses in the natal family and marital family made her an imperfect claimant. Sanjana's complex relationship with money, coupled with her own financial stability, perhaps led to her giving up all the economic rights, including claims on the matrimonial home. Several other women mentioned how much financial labor they had put in, along with the physical and emotional aspects of caregiving labor, only to be kicked out of their matrimonial homes. Money often became another overlooked aspect of women's labor in the household. It is not only family members who diminish and invisibilize the financial and non-financial efforts that goes into sustaining the household, but these mechanisms of invisibilization also happens institutionally by the legal actors. Consider this quote by Megha, a lawyer. Many women who invest all their savings in the matrimonial home in various ways, and some don't even have receipts to show for it. Perhaps if they hadn't put all their money in the household expenses, they would be at least in a better position to buy themselves a home or even rent a nice apartment. But this factor is not considered in quotes. Now, Ankita, my respondent, who's also Megha's client, lived on the second floor of the house owned by her father in law. One day, she got a message from Arjun, her husband, stating that he was moving out of the house and she should vacate the house too. Ankita refused, and her father in law filed an eviction suit against her and Arjun. The eviction suit was strategically filed against both Ankita and Arjun as calling them tenants to get Ankita out of the house. She says that she supported her husband after he decided to quit his corporate job. She also handled all the household expenses. According to Ankita, she did everything in her capacity to be a good daughter in law, took care of financial expenditures of the household. Now, she also had spent a lot of money on household articles, making that house a home. So, Ankita filed for compensation and for alternate accommodation under the Domestic Violence Act after her father in law filed an eviction suit against her to protect her right of residence. As evidence of financial abuse, Ankita filed as many bills as she could to show how she had contributed enormous amounts of money to this household, which was now treating her as an unwanted tenant and trying to evict her. The judge in her case was not convinced and insisted that Ankita disclose her income. The Violence Act per se doesn't require that the complainant disclose the income, as the remedies are based on the occurrence of domestic violence. However, in this case, the judge was adamant and that only on the basis of Ankita's income could she decide on the questions of compensation and or residence rights. If she could afford a residence on her own, there was no question of relief. The juxtaposition of what the judge wanted to see, that is Ankita's income right now, versus what was not considered, the money that she had spent on the household, shows us the interplay of visible and invisible money. The judge assesses whether Ankita's income is sufficient to sustain herself in the future, and therefore doesn't consider it an appropriate economic transaction for Ankita's husbands and in-laws to support her. However, the same income is ignored when it's spent on the marital household, and the judge doesn't consider it as a factor for assessing relief. The institutional relational work the judge undertakes makes the same money visible and invisible in different time periods, demonstrating the temporal and gendered context in which economic transactions are deemed inappropriate and appropriate. The economic present and the economic future of women are treated very differently from their economic past in these cases, and the first is visibilized and could be used as a factor to deny claims. Her physical and mental labor in setting up the house is not taken into account. Her expenditures on interiors, furnishings, other things that actually makes a house a home disappear. Ankita herself goes back and forth and feels unsure about why and how much of the marital assets she is entitled to. She's trapped in her own construction of what caring labor means and what it means to be a good daughter-in-law, and says, how does one put a number to it? How do you do it out of love? Further, Ankita displays a reluctance to be equated with other women who are greedy and exploit the matrimonial families by filing false cases against them, a narrative that we've heard many, many times in the field. I followed up on Ankita's case after leaving the field, and she had already decided not to pursue her financial claims. Several other cases show me how money is treated in cases. Consider the case of Rohini. She's 62 years old and worked as a public educator in the public schools. During the course of marriage, Rohini earned enough money to invest in properties along with her husband. She tells me that her husband Manish made her sign the property documents and sold off properties owned by both of them on the pretext of buying a new property. Manish took all the sale proceeds and decided to separate from her. He agreed to give a meagerly amount to her in mediation hearings, but when it came to parting with the actual money, he refused. As he had insisted to take the housing loan on his name, he claimed that he had paid off the loan on his own and therefore the sale proceeds of the property belonged to him. Rohini had contributed her salary towards the down payment of the house, the children's education, various social obligations, and even gave her husband money for the repayment of the loan. When Rohini filed for interim maintenance, the judge denied it. Rohini tells me about the order. She says the judge passed an adverse order saying that Rohini is getting pension and retirement benefits. She continues, I never hid anything. Also, because I'm a government employee, everything is public. I can't hide anything. So the judge said she has retirement benefits, she's getting a little pension. She doesn't need any interim maintenance. She overlooked all the wrong things that my husband had done. And she pointed out many frivolous and petty things which I had put in my income affidavit. The judge said, why should she be eating non veg? Why should she be eating dry fruits? At the time of the interview, Rohini had already retired from public sector job and earned a minuscule pension to support herself. The judge's dismissal of the claim for interim maintenance signifies a lack of recognition of any economic contribution to the household and for the purchase of the house itself. Rohini had actually meticulously enlisted all her expenses in the income affidavit, like her lawyers had advised her to do. Um, and the income affidavit has to be filed in court when you ask for any kind of sort of interim maintenance or maintenance claims, and you enlist everything, your expenses, your cost, all of that. So the transparency that she displays in her income affidavit is held against her. Her spending on herself is made visible, and she is judged for what the judge considers as indulgences. Spending on nuts, buying meat are taken as signs of prosperity. Culturally, boxes of dry fruits are given as gifts during festivals and signify celebration. For the judge, Rohini, spending on her well being, taking care of her nutrition, and not abstaining from extravagance is incongruous with the life of a woman in monetary distress who has been abandoned by her husband. It demonstrated that she had enough money to pay for her own rent and that she had a reckless attitude towards money, which didn't warrant support. Her money becomes visible through her habits as disclosed in the income affidavit. What remains invisible is that Rohini contributed to purchase of the property. Further, the fact that she co-owned the property, even if she doesn't have proof of the contributions, should have been considered enough to legally justify equal claims to the sale proceeds. Finally, consider this quote, another quote by a mediator in the Delhi High Court. This is a case that I closely followed and attended several mediation hearings in this. She is educated and well qualified. You know it will be tough for her to get anything. This is the case of Ashna, who's 34 years old and has been married for over 4 years. She received an eviction notice, and her in laws had obtained a permanent injunction against her. Thereafter, she could not enter her matrimonial home. Because she thought she had only gone for a couple of days to visit her parents, who were sick at that time, she had carried only a few clothes. Ashna had not only lost access to her matrimonial home, but she had lost essentially all her belongings. As the mediator asked her, Ashna had prepared a list of her belongings, which ran into several pages. During the course of the mediation, the mediator kept dissuading Ashna from filing any legal remedies while persuading her to settle for anything she gets. He time and again highlighted her educational qualifications and how that will lead to futile efforts in the courts. The mediator's logic was simple. Ashna was capable of earning, rebuilding a life on her own, and therefore she should cut her losses. The fact that Ashna's matrimonial family had pressurized her to quit her job, had suffered tremendous loss of income, and finally, when she started working, refused promotions due to the marital situations, was brushed aside easily by the mediator. Educational qualification in her case was taken as a stand in for income, even though the precarious labor market might reveal otherwise. While her qualifications and probable income was highly visibilized and used as a chip for settlement, her demands for return of things that she had bought with her own money was trivialized. When Ashna would mention her belongings that were still in her matrimonial home, she managed to get access to some of it through mediation, but not everything was returned to her. It would be met with smirks and scoffs in the mediation room. The mediator would say, "Koi baat nahi, fir se le lena, just don't fret, just buy it again." The loss of income and the loss of things that was bought with her income during the marriage was rendered completely unimportant. To sum it up, economic present and future of women are treated very differently from their economic past for deciding economic relief. Women's income and spending on the marital household during the subsistence of marriage is completely ignored. Their income, educational qualification, and their spending habits are often used as justification uh, in courtrooms or used as a convincing strategy in mediation hearings. Indian courts have recognized the monetary value of social reproduction, and we can see in Dr. Koteshwaran's work in insurance cases, and compensation for this labor is awarded to a woman's dependents, recognizing her labor after the death. This raises questions about recognizing women's labor when they are themselves the claimants, such as house ownership disputes. We know that a recent Madras High Court judgment granted a wife equal share in marital property, citing her social reproduction labor that enabled her husband to work and buy property, highlighting the importance of institutional gender relational work. While this judgment has only persuasive value in other jurisdictions, such issues are likely to become widely contested. It is therefore important to consider women's monetary contributions as well as part of that labor in the household in tandem and as important part of women's social reproduction labor. This research also has broader implications as well because the gender wealth gap indices may vary globally, but women on the whole, accumulate fewer assets than men. Uh, and this has led to a lot of research on this issue. Structural factors like limited labor market participation and lower wages compared to men have been well documented. The overlooked factor here becomes the legal frameworks, the access to familial wealth that hinders women's wealth accumulations. Um, Recent studies in France, which have like formally equal laws, uh, show that practical implementation perpetuates gender inequalities in family law. Therefore, this is an important aspect to understand the socioeconomic conditions of women. Thank you. Welcome. Any comments and questions that you have now?
Thank you, Upasana. That was a very interesting topic and very interesting to hear your study, the findings, and it's and like actually before your talk, it was a real confusion what it is actually, what how money is gendered. I was just talking to Koteshwaran about this. And it's now very clear that of course our money is gendered actually. So and the intertwining of invisible labor and invisible money, that is completely absolutely right about it. We don't kind of tend to kind of see our kind of work as part of part of the labor, and it need to be rewarded. So thank you for keeping the time. Actually I should have told you that it was but you knew that it was 25 minutes. So thank you for keeping the time, and we have a question answer section now session, and I invite more questions and participants now. The floor is open for questions, but I may kind of ask you as a first. It's just out of my own curiosity, since I'm working with quotation on the schemes related to government schemes like transfer for women. So hearing your cases like women reaching court after separation or after divorce for matrimonial settlement. So hearing the cases, I'm just kind of asking, confused whether even their own employment is leveled against them as not eligible for any claim.
Yeah.
So if the government itself is, we do have schemes that where as part of care economy, government is kind of giving women
Yeah.
monetary transfers like in cash. So would this kind of go against women themselves, like if they are kind of wanting to separate or divorce from their husbands? So that's one confusion.
Thank you so much. So, this is a very interesting question, and I have another paper on sort of child support and women asking for money for their children. And what I say in that is that government has to step in, because we see that in countries where there are these welfare schemes and welfare states have the best outcomes. So what is the, I mean, there used to be a family wage. You used to consider social reproduction as part of the wage, right? And you would give the person who's working from the family, uh, you would consider the social reproduction of the women and give them a family wage. So I think what is, we need to sort of reduce this sort of privatization of risk, and whatever the neoliberal policies are coming up, and the state has to step in. So this, I mean, I do consider that probably there is need for a matrimonial property asset distribution law in India, but I also do believe that a welfare sort of system is the best way to go about it.
Thank you. uh, I would invite others to ask questions, and any kind of like can be clarificatory or any other questions. I see a hand. Go on. You can ask your question directly.
Yeah, hi. First of all, thank you so much, Upasana, for this presentation. And it's lovely to see you after so many years from Jindal. And also hello to Prabha and others on the panel. Uh, first, amazing presentation, so rich with data, and I really like how you thought about um, the money as gendered and how its value, its purpose, how it's seen changes over time. It's something that also turns up a lot in my work. And what a couple of questions that I had were about, because you're talking about a lot of this happening during the course of the marriage, and then talking about it at the time of separation. So that's,
Mhm.
you know, and the ruptures are very real. But I also wondered whether in your data anything emerged about uh, how money was perceived before relations began. I understand that a lot of the interviews, I mean, I think your method as such, because it's ethnographic, may not have, but because through the interviews, whether there was ever a thought about what people thought of with reference to money before they got married, and whether there was an opportunity to talk about it. What I'm trying to then unpack through this is about negotiations around money pre-marriage, and whether that is something that is done at all. Uh, there's of course going to be some cultural. You have to do the cultural dance around it, and relatedly, like what about prenups?
Mhm.
Because that is some sort of a growing trend in India, small, but it's there, and how is there a different conversation around it? Why is it that, do you think it's class related? I'm just trying to like bounce this up and then explore more. But thank you so much, so rich. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simran. And yeah, good to see you after such a long time. Um, so yeah, I don't think my data speaks to that, like their relationship with money before that. Something that came up again and again was about the natal family. That was the conversation that we had like before the relationship, before the marriage, how they sort of thought about money. And a lot of women sort of have a very sort of uh, obviously a lot of natal families have started supporting women in cases of divorce, and it's also classed, I guess. But they do not think that they are the heirs for their natal family. Like going back home is considered again like a frowned upon option. They are sort of still, for example, the case of Ankita, she was in a highly abusive relationship, but she was not wanting to term it as abuse. And it was something that her parents would sort of tell her to just make it work, and go back to her family. So even this case of like she was again questioning me because she knew I was a lawyer, that what is like abuse, what is domestic violence. Her husband had strangled her, so it was a clear case of like there was no question that there was no abuse involved, but she never filed for like any physical like 498A or anything like that. She was just asking that I spent enormous amount of money and like now I'm being like kicked out. I thought this was going to be my home forever, So she filed for financial abuse, and financial abuses cases are seldom sort of successful. But the relationship, what they thought about money in terms of going into marriage, I don't think they really like spoke about that. None of them had prenups. None of the women in my sample had prenups. I think it is also prenup is it's a growing trend, probably in a class, in a higher sort of class. And there were a lot of women who were like public educators and school teachers and all of that, so, right? So they probably don't even think of prenup as an option. But that is an interesting question. I would like to see how, like, uh, prenups are, because when I was practicing family law, it was very rare for people to, we had just started seeing like people would come into the office and be like, oh, we need a prenup drafted or something, but it was still very rare.
Thank you so much. No, this is great. Thanks.
Yeah, there's one more person, Saptarshi.
Hi. Hi, Upasana. Nice
Hi.
to see you. Um, Thank you for the presentation. I'm looking forward to reading the whole thing. I have two questions.
Mhm,
One is closely tied to Simran's question.
mhm,
It's about negotiation. So these eviction suits that in-laws file under the Senior Citizens Act, I mean, that's a strategic move, and
Yeah.
we've seen how, these eviction suits kind of play out.
Yeah.
What's the counter move that women use? I'm interested to know kind of that dynamic. Right. So what kind of strategies do women adopt
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
response to these eviction suits? That's one question.
Yeah.
The second, and this goes to the heart of your paper, how money is kind of invisibilized. Certain expenses are financial contributions are invisibilized by the legal system, and I
Yeah.
wonder if it relates to maintenance itself as a remedy, and the distinction between maintenance and matrimonial property. So matrimonial property uh, looks to the past. It looks at what you've done, or it assumes that you have sort of made significant contribution. But maintenance considers the future needs,
Yeah.
where the past does not matter.
Yeah.
So then one response is that will this problem will remain
Yeah.
as long as we try using maintenance to reach the outcome of matrimonial property. This problem will remain. And the second possibility is to redefine maintenance itself as a remedy, and include the past in that. So how might we do that? I mean, if you have thoughts on that, I'd really be
Yeah.
interested to hear them. But thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you so much. I think I always think that sociologists are good at pointing out problems and not the solution. And I feel like you have given us thoughts about the solution to this, which is great. But okay, so the first part is that the strategy, right? So the strategy is filing for right to residence under the PW, like the DV Act, to protect the residents against that eviction suit. But a lot of cases basically have said that in many cases that the senior citizens right will supersede, especially when the in-laws are the owners of the house, right? But the problem in India is that in-laws are the owners of the house, like especially in Delhi, like none of the young, like 30, I mean, some of the people that I studied are in their 30s or like late early 40s or something, and they don't own the house, they live with their parents. So I think that the problem is that we see this, and I think the judges also know this is a strategy, right? Like the parents sort of advertising in a newspaper that they've disinherited the son, or in this case filing an eviction suit and calling the son the tenant, or saying that they're creating nuisance, they're fighting, blah blah blah, all of that. All of those are strategies that the legal system actually knows, and knows it as a strategy. But still, like, obviously, when parents are old, there is also this cultural thing about protecting their rights versus like a sort of, greedy daughter-in-law. So I feel that when there's a clash in the senior citizens' rights and the DV Act, uh, most probably the senior citizens' rights will be protected. And the second question about the financial contribution, I actually saw that in my sort of field work, it was not only related to maintenance. So Ankita's case is a case of financial abuse. She was not asking for maintenance, but she was asking for compensation under the DV Act. Um, in in Rohini's case, she asked for interim maintenance, but there was also like clear sort of evidence that she had paid for the matrimonial property. Like she had actually, they were co-owners of the matrimonial property, and there was so this the I did not say all of this in the presentation because it would go beyond the time limit, but the husband basically showed that he, in his income affidavit, declared that he had given uh, 70 sort of lakhs or 80 lakhs to an NGO, like a sham NGO. And that was not picked up by the judge. The judge focused on the fact that Rohini was eating like dry fruits and eating meat, or like, all of that. But On the other hand, it was not taken into account that he basically has done the sham sort of thing about giving it to a random sort of NGO that was not questioned. And that was interim maintenance, but it was also related to the questions of her contributing to the payment of a property that she's been completely cheated out of. It's actually, I wouldn't even call it a family dispute. It's completely cheating what the husband did in this case. So I think it's beyond maintenance, all these cases that I'm looking at. Yeah, in maintenance, obviously we need probably, I think that's the solution. Like if we don't have like a matrimonial property assets that we don't see coming through, redefining maintenance might be the solution to see that uh, why is she asking for money, and that is a question that not only the lawyers ask, not only the judges ask, but the women themselves keep on questioning because there's no clear law on it. Like, why am I entitled? Like, why am I asking for this money? And especially when you don't have kids. For kids, it's probably like easier saying that, okay, I need some money for the kids, but women themselves don't know. I mean, if you tell them that, yeah, but labor is not compensated, and you become all sociological with them, they'll just like back off. They will be like, no, no, this is out of love. We didn't do it because we want money, you know? So there's like this entire unclear aspect of why women should be even asking for money, especially when they have education or employment. I don't know if it answers your question, but these are sort of some of the thoughts that came in my mind.
Upasana, there are a few questions in the chat. If you can just look at
Okay.
it and yeah, if you would
Uh,
like to respond.
So I think there's a big sort of and I think anyone can jump in at this moment, but my thought on, I did not deal with any prenups, and it was basically prenups were considered that they are against public policy under the Contracts Act. And but I think what is going on is that if prenups are considered like reasonable, they can still be enforced. I don't know if I'm right on this. Anybody can stop me and tell me if I'm wrong. But there are prenups that I've seen during my family law, which sort of goes into, oh, she cannot like put on for more than 5 kilos. Like it's like, and I feel that if those prenups go to court, they will be struck down. So anybody can jump in and tell me if I'm right or wrong, because I haven't dealt with prenups in a long time.
Yeah. And
No, I think you're completely right. Prenups are not valid.
Yeah.
Only an Islamic marriage contract um, is the kind of contract which is upheld by courts, but no other contract.
Yeah.
okay, let me invite Anne Stewart. She's been holding her hands. Yeah.
Thank you. It's really interesting. It's more a reflection, I think. I mean, I really like the temporality element that you point out, and then also just thinking about the issue around the maintenance element. I'm just struck by the way in which the women are being constructed within the comments, and I was reflecting back on that sort of history of maintenance and the whole Charbonneau and so on, and it was about construction of destitution. So the sort of the history of the sort of penal construction of women was destitution, and you were struggling, and clearly these women are not in that category of destitution, but the sort of language of entitlement and deserving still seems, or is it completely separate? But it does seem to me it relates somewhere to those gendered constructions of deserving, and therefore refusal to recognize the contribution during the time of the marriage, really. So I think the sort of temporality and the idea of maintenance being for the future, although, as you say, this isn't particularly about maintenance, but in the absence
Yeah.
a matrimonial property act, then in a way it does seem to focus around that. But I just wondered if there's a legacy there in any way, but it's
Yeah.
just a thought.
No, you're completely right. And I think one part of my paper actually touches upon it about the language of the court. So it's basically maintenance is not supposed to be a bounty, and it's supposed to just be like for some amount of sort of living and all of that, which the courts have actually, turned around and said that no, like, but the lifestyle matters and you maintain that lifestyle of a Delhi High Courts have said that. And that's why this entire income affidavit was created to say that, oh, like, the wife's sort of status and lifestyle has to be maintained after the marriage, what was during the marriage. But we see in my cases that the income affidavit is actually held against them, saying that, oh, like, you're being, I mean, do you want to eat like cashew nuts or almonds? Like, and this woman was like, I'm 62. I mean, if I don't eat nuts right now, when do I, like, when do I eat them? And I actually earned my living. I provided for the property, all of those things, right? So I think that, yeah, it is historically about destitution. And so these middle class women who are educated, and perhaps they can probably live a life, like they will probably not be thrown out of on the streets, but they do find it hard to find access to homes. For example, I mean, in Delhi, if you're a single woman, you find it difficult to rent a place. There are these sort of problems that they encounter for finding housing. They can't buy a house, that's for sure, but it's also access to like safe renters that they're worried about. So that's something that comes up again and again. Like, they will not be pushed into homelessness probably or destitution, uh, but like, there are other factors that affects their wealth. And one factor is that they've spent everything on this matrimonial home that they actually thought would be forever theirs.
Okay, Anderson, Holly, you can go on.
Hiya. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question, but I think you've like covered it quite a bit already. Other people have asked pretty similar things to what I'm about to ask. But I did a very, very, very short sort of final paper for a module once about the gender division of labor in the United Kingdom. And I basically sort of argued that it was sort of garnered by the UK's existing legislative definitions of what labour is. And I was just wondering if you could expand a bit more in terms of your view on how, like, what the state's role, either legislatively or in some kind of initiative that would incite a change to alleviate women of this situation in India, because it's so deeply entrenched beyond just domestic divisions of labor, but in professional labor. And sort of what sort of like time frame, considering wider social context, do you think that women would find themselves like more equal with regards to the gendering of money?
Oh my God. Those are like existential questions. Uh, but I time frame, I mean, obviously we've everybody says, oh my God, if you talk about the 60s, it was worse. Like, so be thankful right now. So I don't have an answer on the time frame, honestly. I feel that there are sort of really basic fundamental changes that need to be done in every society. I'm not just talking about India, but for it to actually usher some sort of great era of equality. For the gender division of labor, I think so. For example, I said that, like, Prabha's work actually talks about social reproduction in like insurance cases. There are these sort of ways by which labor has been recognized, right? But I feel that we need to do more. So, for example, I said that insurance cases, we are actually recognizing the woman's labor after she dies. Like, it is sort of recognition, but the benefiters are not her, but her claimants. So I feel like there has to be done more to recognize the labor. And I don't know, like I feel that women themselves are so conflicted and I don't know what to do about it. I mean, again, like I feel like after moving to sociology, I've become a problem like pointer instead of problem solver. So I really don't know what the solution exactly is. But when I was talking to women, I really wanted to sometimes shake them and be like, listen, like like you should be not giving up your claims. But a lot of women did give up their claims by the end. They were tired of fighting. They were tired of like negotiating in mediation halls. And I used to hear this term again and again called litigation fatigue. And basically the mediators and the lawyers would be like, oh, like, okay, fine, we'll shut the mediation for now, but you're going to come back to us. Like it was almost like an abusive relationship with the mediation centers, that you're going to come back to us ultimately. So I feel that like I feel that negotiations and mediations have to have some kind of um, you know, I don't know, rules or something which makes because it arose out of feminist demands. Women were considered that they will be like in charge of their own narratives and mediation centers. So I feel that I don't want to completely um, remove mediation as an option, but I feel that that could be an arena where negotiations actually take place in an equitable manner, you know. So maybe something about that, maybe something up to make the mediations better.
Okay, just quickly a follow-up
Yeah.
question. Do you think for the women it's like their conflicted views are coming from sort of a deep-rooted internalized misogyny, or is it coming from sort of a disillusionment with a system that they're trying to find help?
Um, no, I feel there are two things at play. I feel that the rights are not clear, right? So they don't know what they're asking for. Everybody's asking for it. So they know that, oh, in divorces we can file maintenance and alimony. That's about it. Whether they are entitled to it, whether how much of it, all of that is completely unclear. So I feel that it stems out of this unclear sort of arena of what they're asking for, right? B, I feel like for some of the women that I was like, especially middle class, upper middle class women, I think it's a lot of respectability. Like they don't want to go against that respectability norms of against the family and being, and there's such a big narrative of women being liars and greedy, that I feel that the problem is, I feel with, I don't know about other sort of women, but the women I studied, I felt there was a lack of solidarity in that in that class, at least. Like everybody thinks that their story is true and everybody else is the greedy one. So I feel that there's this problem of solidarity. There's no common solidarity of like, yeah, like many women are going through it. They would always ask me, how do you know that all these other women are not lying to you, so that, I think that's the other thing. It's like, A, law is unclear. B, there's respectability politics. C, like there's this great narrative of the lying woman, which like really affects them. And friends and family also sort of contribute to that. Like, why do you think you're entitled to this house? You did not buy it. So it's about like who buys the house, but not who contributes to it in many ways, even monetarily.
Yeah, I think we are running out of time. Actually, I can see Harini's and Prabha's hand. Harini, quickly, your question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Upasana. It's a very interesting talk. So the question I had was actually related to the kind of methodology you had done, because you not only looked at the case laws, I think because you mentioned that you were a practicing lawyer and also went to these mediation centers and also shadowed like lawyers during these proceedings. So I think it's a very rich, like data set from which you're drawing these your findings. So in such a like rich data set, when you look at these two institutions, you're looking at like mediations and like courts. What do you like? I was wondering what would be something which is not kind of reflected or ends up coming out in a court order, because like since you've been working with the women themselves and also these mediators and like the other players in the whole system, like the courts, like the court order does not reflect anything which goes on in the whole litigation process. So I was wondering if there are some interesting like factors, like how, for example, you mentioned those habits, like courts considering these habits to be extravagant and like denying interim maintenance. Are there something else which the courts are not looking at, but something which comes up in your interaction with clients or with the mediators or anything?
I think, I mean, I'll give you an example. This was when I was practicing law, and a lot of conversations don't turn up in the court orders. And also, like, I mean, mediation conversations never do. Like, they're like confidential in nature, all of those things, right? So none of those comes out in the court order. So when we look at court orders, we actually seldom see it. And this was something that prompted this research, because I was teaching family law, but I was also associated with this family law firm, and I was like, I'm teaching all these kids these things about how the law operates, but when I go into court, it's a different story, and it could just, so there's, I'll give you an example. This might be something that like actually prompted my sort of research. But there was this case, and this the daughters were disinherited, and this brother had 400 crore worth of property in Delhi, and he basically, in the will it was like something about, oh, whatever he wants to give his sisters, like some like random like clause like that, and the sisters were obviously demanding for an equal share, and they were talking about how the will is like not sort of, maybe not real or forged or something like that, and they were demanding equal shares to the property, because this was after like 2005 and the interpretation of what 2005 amendment can do. And instead of saying that, oh, like, but the 2005 amendment says this, we'll have to assess if the will is real, blah blah blah, all of that, the judges were like trying to appeal to the paternalistic side of the brother, saying, come on, like, you're the brother, like, she ties you rakhi, and please, like, be a bit more generous, all of that, right? But that again, like, maybe they were trying to help appeal to the paternalistic side, but I always see that rights, economic rights, women's rights, all of that conversation somehow gets left out. Like in mediation center, this is again in another paper I'm doing. Um, like whenever the wife would say something about like, but like my child needs this, and she was not even so. Another thing that I've seen is that many women don't ask for themselves, because they're like, okay, fine, like we are working, we'll just do it. But for the child in Delhi, like you need money, and like 50% of contribution, they'll not even ask for full contribution from the husband. They'll be like, okay, just give us something. And in this case, she would say, but my right, something about like she would mention her right, and the mediator would just shut her off. He would be like, do not bring in the law here. This is not, we are here to talk as like friends. But the father is like being adamant about, I need 130 days of visitation, blah, blah, blah. This is my right. Nothing would be said to him, right? So you would see that the women's economic rights or the language of rights is missing from the courts. Like it's not there. It's either the paternalistic appealing side about like, you're the brother, protect her, or like it's like, don't talk about rights. So this is something that is, I mean, mediation also operates within the court system. It is a legal sort of, we're not talking in a living room. It is in the court system, right? So why shouldn't the language of rights be there? So that is something else that I noticed a lot in my fieldwork.
Okay, Prabha, I think you would
Thank
like
you.
to.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Fascinating paper and project. Can't wait to read more. I wanted to hear a little. I mean, I also had a lot of concerns about not concerns about your methodology, but the difficulty of family law scholars being able to, if you really want to understand how exploitative the institution of marriage is, its private character, infiltrates all aspects of the system so that you can't actually access this kind of information. But I guess I was more interested in the question of relational work coming from economic sociology. I mean, should we think that all institutions involved in dispute resolution are basically doing, I mean, are doing relational work? Are all lawyers doing relational work all the time? I mean, what is unique about relational work in this context? Because I think it's also been used in economic sociology to pass out different orientations towards money and different kinds of money, how women treat. So I'm just curious how you're thinking, who who are you drawing on and what work it's doing, especially in the context of the legal system?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I really like this question because relational work is also like an overused and an underused concept at the same time. And I feel like what I distinguish as relational work is that there has to be an economic component to it. You assess what is appropriate in that relationship. And for I understand that in disputes, obviously the family members are, I mean, there are family members who are also are uh, very nice, very generous, and they're like, yes, like we must support our ex-daughter-in-law or ex-wife or all of that. We see those cases as well. But most of the cases, they'll not want to part with money. So who is in charge of doing that appropriate matching of economic transaction with the relationship? It is the lawyers and the judges and the mediators. So I feel that that sort of it's basically a delegated relational work because the family is not obviously they will judge according to their own sort of benefits because there is a rupture in the relationship. But the one who has to be the sort of objective judge of the appropriateness of money transfer to the relationship, whatever the relationship was, in this case becomes that institution. So that is how sort of I think of relational work when there is sort of an economic sort of delegation of appropriateness, sort of judging the appropriateness. Um, I'm forgetting what the second question was.
Just who are who are you drawing on
Oh,
within the
yeah.
economic society?
So I mean, I draw a lot on Salazar for this work. But Nina Bandelj was someone who basically talked about the gendering of relational work and the temporal context. She basically said that we need to understand what temporal context and how it makes the relational work different. And that was basically that prompted me in looking at how the same money is treated differently at different stages of disputes or different stages of relationship. So Nina Bandel is someone I look upon. There is someone who did a study on Ukrainian couples, Anderson. She was published in 2017. So Anderson basically talks about the gendering of money, but she looks at cohabiting couples, and she says that basically women's money is always considered as supplemental, and women, even when they are earning more, they will let the husband spend on the essentials like paying rent or paying the essentials so that to preserve their masculinity. So that is something that I draw on as well.
Okay, Upasana, there are a few comments in the chat. Actually, Parvati Raghuram has commented. If you would like to respond to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important. I feel that in India, especially, we only think about like the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law relationships, and I feel that the distinction and the sort of distinction of mother-in-law, father-in-law, and how they act in gatekeeping patriarchy, I think it's important to understand that. Um, Yeah, I think there are obviously the senior citizens and the conflict between DV. I'm not saying that every case you need to sort of, it's basically you should not support the senior citizens, but I feel that there can be a way in which both the rights are protected, specifically like pushing the husband to provide for an alternate accommodation. So you don't have to sort of reduce the rights of the senior citizens or anything. Like I'm not saying that, but there is definitely a solution to that problem. Um, in this as yes,
think.
I think yeah.
Yeah, go on, go on, go on.
Yeah.
I think
I'm saying that, yeah, there's obviously qualitative data. I feel like there's something about how there can be differences in all parts of India. And I get that the limitation of qualitative data is that you cannot overgeneralize or generalize the situation of women, and that's why like I picked like a small sort of segment of the population, and it will be interesting to see actually how like in different sort of cultural contexts also. I feel this cultural context is also important because patriarchality is such a like big sort of trend existing in North India. So it will be interesting to see actually how other parts of India are like functioning in the same sort of situations. Yeah, yeah, I think that's it.
I think we have, overstepped on our time, but then it's fine. It was a really interesting talk and good question answer session also. I think nobody else has raised hands, and uh, I, we have had a wonderful session today. Thank you so much for your time and your, talk. It was really interesting, and we would like to have you more, have to hear more on you. And of course, if you can share some of your works with us, it would be very, very much interesting to read. I know it is there, and I've a couple of papers I myself have downloaded. So we're looking
Yeah.
forward to hear you more. Yeah.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
everyone.
I'm
Thank
waiting
you
for
for the participants also.
yeah, I'm waiting to hear back after a revise and resubmit. So hopefully the paper will be published soon, so I can
Sure.
send it out to you all.
All the
Yeah.
best for you.
Thank you so
Thanks a
much.
lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.